Welcome to the Planet MicroCap Showcase Virtual 2022. I'm your host, Robert Kraft, and now presenting at our event is Scott Powell, Vice President, Investor Relations for Volition. It's a publicly traded company. The symbol is VNRX on the NYSE American. Scott, take it away.
Thank you, Bobby. It's a pleasure to be back at the Planet MicroCap Showcase, presenting virtually today. Thank you, everyone who is listening to today's presentation for VolitionRx Limited. As Bobby mentioned, we're publicly traded on the NYSE American, ticker VNRX. I would like to point you to our forward-looking statements and disclaimer slide. Just a reminder that I'll be making some forward-looking statements during today's presentation that may or may not materialize in the future. And so we do point you to this disclaimer and do claim protection under the Safe Harbor Act. A little bit about Volition. There are 5 verticals within the company. I'll spend most of today's presentation on Nu.Q Vet and Nu.Q.Nets, as those are currently our 2 most salient divisions, where we have a number of potential upcoming milestones and catalysts. Nu.Q itself is an acronym for nucleosome quantification. We are a diagnostics company developing blood tests to screen for different disease states, both oncology and non-oncology based disease states in both humans and animals. In the center of your screen, Nu.Q Vet, that's our animal health division, and we are commercial stage here. We have a blood test that screens for cancer in canines. We have 4 licensing agreements in place, and I'll spend most of the presentation talking about the animal health vertical. The other vertical I'll spend time on is Nu.Q.Nets. This is really our first significant movement into looking at non-oncology based disease states in humans. Ideally, this blood test will be administered to patients already confirmed infected with either sepsis or COVID-19 and potentially other diseases to monitor and predict disease severity. And I'll talk a bit more about that program going forward. Turning to Nu.Q Vet, initially, the product is called the Nu.Q Vet Cancer Screening Test. And this test is aimed largely to solve a major problem in animal health diagnostics. There are about 80 million canines in the United States, and every year about 6 million of those canines are diagnosed with cancer. The problem is that the vast majority of those 6 million canines diagnosed with cancer annually are diagnosed because they're symptomatic first. So they're demonstrably sick, they're ill, they've been ill for a period of time. And unfortunately, if it is confirmed that cancer is the underlying cause of those symptoms, because the animal is symptomatic, it's invariably a late stage cancer. It's usually a stage 3 or a stage 4. And unfortunately, when your canine is older, symptomatic, confirmed that it has cancer, it's probably late stage, and there's not much that you can do for that animal. You can really do 3 things. You can do nothing, you can euthanize the animal, so put it to sleep, or you can treat, and treatment is a very expensive undertaking. It could run upwards of $25,000, $35,000 or more to treat a canine with stage 4 cancer. And you may not extend its life by that long of a period. And there are obviously side effects and adverse reactions that could occur to the canine while it's undergoing treatment. Why are most canines diagnosed with cancer symptomatic on the symptomatic side? It's because canines do not get screened asymptomatically for cancer. They simply don't, because the confirmatory diagnoses are too expensive, too invasive, and could cause complications. So the confirmatory tests to determine whether or not a canine actually has cancer and what stage the cancer is are 2 modalities. One are imaging technologies, so sonograms, X-rays, CAT scans, MRIs, and so forth, and or biopsy, so taking a tissue sample of the canine's organ or organs, and so forth. So obviously, running imaging technologies and or performing biopsies are costly, they're expensive. They could run in the thousands of dollars to run these procedures. They're invasive. They could potentially harm the canine, radiation exposure during a biopsy, a risk of infection, and so forth. So for these reasons, canines are simply not screened asymptomatically for cancer. Right? You don't take a healthy 5-year-old German Shepherd to your vet for a wellness check and say, Doc, my German Shepherd is healthy, but I'd still like to spend a few $1,000s for you to run an X-ray, a full body CAT scan, biopsy its liver, spleen, pancreas, and kidneys while you're at it. You simply don't do that. It's way too expensive, it's too invasive, and it's too risky to the canine. Also, the canines have to be administered anesthesia before an imaging technology test is performed or a biopsy is performed, because the canine doesn't know that it's supposed to sit still for one of these procedures. And just like in humans, certain canines have adverse reactions to the administration of anesthesia. So for these reasons, there's no asymptomatic screening of canines currently conducted. Finally, for the first time with the implementation of our blood test, canines now can get screened asymptomatically for cancer. Because our test is priced at under $100, it'll likely be priced at between $50 and $75 to the canine owner. So it's a very affordable test. When you take your canine in for a wellness check, you're spending $200 or $300 or $400 anyway for a wellness check. So to spend another $50 or $75, we think is very palatable for most, if not all, canine owners. And our test is accurate, as you can see from the third bullet point here. We detected 2 cancers with very high accuracy. You can see for hemangiosarcoma and lymphoma, we were at around 80% sensitivity, so only missed around 20% of canines with these 2 cancers. So catching 8 out of 10. So very high accuracy at 97% specificity, which equates to only 3% false positives. So very accurate test with almost no false positives. The way that this test is likely to be positioned, or how we would hope it to be positioned with our licensing partners, is as part of a wellness check. So when you take your canine in for an annual or semi-annual physical, and the veterinarian is checking your canine's eyes, ears, nose, throat, mouth, skin for lesions, for pockets of inflammation, and so forth. The idea is that, and also running other blood work, running blood tests to screen your canine and measure its other blood work, looking at glucose or triglycerides or white blood cell, red blood cell count, cholesterol, and so forth. Canine could just be ordered to have another blood test, a Volition blood test. And if that test comes back positive for cancer, it comes back as low, moderate, and high risk, depending on the quantity of nucleosome debris in the canine's blood sample. So if it comes back as low risk, that means there's a very small amount of nucleosome debris in the canine's blood sample. It probably doesn't have cancer or anything else wrong with it. So come back in 6 or 12 months for another Nu-Q vet cancer screening test. If it's moderate, it may warrant additional investigation through some further testing. And if it comes back high, your canine probably has cancer or something else very wrong with it, and it warrants immediate further investigation. So running additional tests, whether they're scans or biopsies and so forth. So we think this will be a test that has significant uptake, because it does provide a piece of very valuable information while your canine is still healthy. And just like in humans, if cancer is caught in canines while the canine is still asymptomatic, it's likely an early stage cancer that probably hasn't metastasized to other organs. Therefore, the cancer is generally more operable than a canine that's already sick with a late stage cancer. And also the treatments, if the canine owner opts to treat for the cancer, and I think most would on the asymptomatic side, the treatments are much more effective because the canine's immune system hasn't been as compromised from the disease as a canine that's suffering from a stage 3 or stage 4 cancer and is already demonstrably ill. And we're not the only ones to believe in the utility of this test. As you can see from this slide here, we signed in March a $28 million licensing deal with the Heska Corporation for Heska to market and sell our blood test to the veterinary community. We received a $10 million upfront payment in March, an additional $18 million based upon milestones. We're expecting an additional 13 of that 18 million, most likely in the first half of 2023. So this will provide a meaningful amount of non-dilutive capital being injected into Volition, ideally in the first half of next year. And in addition to the Heska licensing deal, we have licensing agreements with Texas A&M University, with their Veterinary College of Medicine, where we developed our blood test to screen for cancer in canines. So that test has been for sale through Texas A&M's website for a number of years now. We also have a supply and distribution agreement with Sage Healthcare in Singapore to market our blood test for canines in Singapore and in other parts of Asia. The third licensing deal here was signed with Heska, again, a $28 million licensing deal. In addition, we receive up to $10 per test for every test that Heska sells going forward under the terms of the supply and distribution agreement. So in addition to up to $28 million in non-dilutive capital, we have recurring revenue from unit sales for every blood test that Heska sells going forward. In return for this, we gave Heska exclusivity on the point of care technology. So Heska has a point of care device called the Element I+, and that is a device that certain veterinarians have in their clinic that can process a blood sample and produce results in a matter of minutes. Heska has non-exclusive rights to reference lab testing, and that's different from point of care. There are two ways to analyze a canine's blood sample. One is to put it into a point of care machine like Heska's Element I+ and get results almost instantaneously. Or if you're running a number of different blood tests, 5 or 10 or 15 different blood tests in the canine, you'll probably send the blood sample out to a reference lab for analysis, and then within a few business days, get the results emailed or mailed back to you. So Heska has exclusivity on point of care, non-exclusive on reference labs. And then about a month and a half ago, we announced our fourth licensing deal. We did not announce the counterparty. We expect that to be made public, likely in the first quarter or first half of 2023. And again, we're hoping that this blood test is packaged as part of a wellness package for canines when they're in for wellness checks. So really excited about this opportunity. And as you can see, this significant interest within the veterinary community, as evidenced by the 4 licensing deals that we have signed thus far. And then turning to Nu.Q NETs, this is an altogether different product. However, it's based off of the same underlying nucleosomics technology at Volition. The challenge that doctors face, and this is our first movement into non-oncology based disease states. The issue that is faced is when a person is infected with COVID-19 or sepsis, if the person is confirmed infected but is asymptomatic, the doctors and patients really have no way of knowing which of those patients will develop a very severe reaction to COVID or sepsis infection. So as we all know from the COVID-19 pandemic, if one of us were to test positive for COVID-19 and we had very mild symptoms, what happens? We're sent home to isolate for 10 or 12 days, right? And we're supposed to monitor our symptoms. And for certain individuals, on day 5 or day 8, for instance, certain individuals will get really, really sick from the COVID-19 infection. And so what happens is it's a reactionary process, right? You're confirmed infected, asymptomatic, sent home to isolate, and if you get really sick, go back to your hospital, go call your doctor, seek medical treatment, and that's obviously not the optimal way to approach a really severe reaction to sepsis or COVID. But unfortunately, doctors and patients don't have any really good tools to predict in advance which of these patients will progress from being asymptomatic to being highly symptomatic and having a really bad reaction to infection. And so it's reactionary. And so certain people that have a really bad reaction to COVID-19 infection, say on day 8, some of them aren't going back to the hospital fast enough. Some of them aren't going back to the hospital at all. Some are not seeking medical treatment or intervention in a timely manner. That means there's potential organ damage being done, and some people will die because they didn't seek medical resources or intervention. And so what we are developing is ideally an early warning test, a test that would be able to predict in advance which patients infected with sepsis or COVID are likely to be experiencing a really severe reaction to infection ahead of that reaction, ahead of that severe reaction. So the science is elucidated here. You can see on the left, when a person's body is infected with a pathogen, a bacteria, a virus, one of the body's first immune responses is for your white blood cells to migrate to the infection site and to inject neutrophil extracellular traps, or nets. These are chromatin material. You can see from the diagram on your right, these are chromatin material. They act like and look like spider webs or nets, and they contain cytotoxic proteins. The objective is for these nets to envelop and neutralize the invading pathogen or virus. Now, for reasons unknown in science, in certain individuals, there's an overproduction of nets, and the body goes into overproduction or overdrive. And what happens is that there are essentially too many cytotoxic proteins being produced, and these cause complications. They can cause stroke, they can cause thrombosis, they can cause organ failure and death. In fact, I believe the primary cause of death is thrombosis being caused by the cytokine storm or the overproduction of nets. Our technology is able, with over 99% accuracy, to quantify the amount of nets in a person's blood sample. And we know there's a direct correlation between quantity of nets in a patient's blood sample and disease severity. So you can see a little bit more here on this slide. Is a significant market opportunity. We all know about the COVID-19 pandemic and the sickness and death that occurred from COVID-19 infection. Many of you may not understand how significant of a problem sepsis is. You can see the data here in bullet point number 2, that sepsis is a bacterial infection that most people catch in the hospital inadvertently. You're going in for another procedure and you end up getting a sepsis infection, unfortunately. You can see that this occurs to 1.7 million adults every year in just the US, and 270,000 American adults die every year as a result of a sepsis infection, which most of them didn't have when entering the hospital. It's a big problem at hospitals. And again, just like with COVID-19, the hospitals don't really have any good tools to predict which patients infected with sepsis who are currently asymptomatic or mildly symptomatic will then progress to a very severe reaction from sepsis infection. So you can see the utility if there's patients infected with COVID-19 or sepsis, and our blood test is able to be administered several times per day to monitor a patient's nets level. If all of a sudden we see a spike from, say, 50 nanograms per microliter to 20,000 nanograms per microliter, we know that that person is about to get really, really sick. The question that we haven't fully answered, and we're running longitudinal studies now in the UK to answer this question, is how far in advance does the body overproduce? So in other words, if the body goes from 50 nanograms per microliter to 20,000 nanograms per microliter, is the person sick within minutes or hours from the cytokine storm or the overproduction of nets? Or is there a lag time? Does it take 12 hours, 36 hours, 48 hours, for instance, for the cytotoxic proteins to start to have a really adverse effect on a patient? And if there is that lag time, that, say, 1 or 2 day window of opportunity, there's a chance to get that patient, to triage that patient and get that patient the medical resources or intervention necessary, so that when the inevitable severe symptoms occur, the body, your body's already been primed, for instance. Maybe it's antibiotics, maybe it's being on an oxygen tank or a ventilator, anti-inflammatories, whatever the treatment protocol might be, so that when the severe reaction comes, there's less damage done to a person's organs So reducing morbidity rates and ideally reducing deaths and mortality rates, because doctors and patients are able to get on the other side of the equation. Instead of being reactionary, waiting for a person to get really sick and then treating ahead of them getting really sick. And then when they start to get really sick, the body is able to cope with that in a better fashion, so that there's reduced damage to the organs and lives that are ultimately saved. So really excited about our NETosis opportunity here. We expect to have some of this longitudinal data that we're running at some top universities and hospitals in the UK, ideally in the first half of 2023. And then I'll just wrap up on our financials and open it up to any questions. As you can see here at the end of Q2 2022, been a market cap of just over 100 million. Our market cap's fluctuated a fair amount over the past couple of years as we've had some market volatility, but we've been in that $100 to $200 million range for most of the past few years. Again, our ticker VNRX on the NYSE American. You can see the 52-week range here. Our stock has been weaker this year, as many healthcare and diagnostics companies have been weak in 2022 due to the macro environment, burning a little over $2 million per month, as you can see. Cash on hand at the end of the quarter was 16.4 million. We do have, as I mentioned, some non-dilutive milestone payments coming from the Heska licensing deal expected in the first half of next year, and then we'll have ramp in terms of revenue from Heska sales, which we expect to be significant over the course of the next few years. And then we do expect revenue ramp from our fourth licensing partner. We'll talk more about that in the new year. In terms of our cap structure, very clean cap structure, about 52 million shares out basic, about 55 million shares out fully diluted. The delta there between basic and fully diluted are just stock options for management. We have a very clean cap structure, no warrants, no convertible debt, no preferred, no convertible preferred, no equity lines. We do have an effective S3 shelf registration statement on file with the Securities and Exchange Commission. It's a $100 million shelf, and we do have a $25 million at the market or ATM facility with Jefferies. There are 5 analysts covering the company. We have coverage from Cantor Fitzgerald, Maxim Group, Aegis Capital, Zacks, and the Benchmark Company. Our website is volition.com, and hopefully all of you will go to our website to learn more about the company. At the bottom of our landing page, you can sign up for press releases to be emailed to you directly to your inbox. And there's some good videos and interviews with other members of management, also our scientific team, which will allow you to learn a lot more about Volition. So again, VolitionRx Limited, ticker VNRX on the NYSE American, and our website, volition.com. Thank you all very much today for attending my presentation at the Planet MicroCap Showcase. And hopefully you'll all continue to follow the Volition story going forward. Bobby.
All right, Scott, thank you so much for your presentation here. We got time for about one question. So I'll ask you the question that I'm asking everybody who's presenting here today. You know, we're managing through tough markets right now. What measures is the company taking to manage macroeconomic pressures currently affecting most microcap companies across the board?
I think the main thing that we're doing is we're pushing forward with commercial products. You know, we've had a sort of a soft launch of our blood test through Texas A&M sales, but now with the Heska deal and with the fourth licensing deal with another important player in the animal health space, we expect to be starting to turn into, you know, generating meaningful revenue next year and significant revenue in the years going forward. And then we have the non-dilutive payments coming in from the Heska licensing deal. So really making sure that we have a solid cash position, that we're generating revenue from product sales and moving into commercial stage.
Very good. All right, well, Scott, thank you so much for your presentation here today. For everybody, thank you for participating and watching Scott's presentation, and have a great rest of your event.
Thanks, everyone.